I have always loved the woods. Ever since I was a small child, I found more comfort in them than anywhere else. It wasn't until my adult life that this had changed. It all started on a normal camping trip during a cold November weekend. Most people would have canceled the trip due to it recently raining, and with a high of 37 all weekend long. However, I enjoyed the extra challenge. The trip was to Mammoth Cave National Park in south central Kentucky. For those of you who aren't in the know, Mammoth Cave is the largest cave system in the world, with a beautiful national park full of amazing trails and places to go canoeing and all your other favorite outdoor activities. That is, of course, on a surface level. Many locals know not to go on the north side of the park at night alone, or even in a small group. Quite a few people have gone missing over the years, and very seldom is it on the south side of the park. The park is split down the middle by the Green River, which stretches across the park from east to west, connecting Nolan Lake to Green River Lake, both of which being popular spots during the summer for camping. Everyone's uncle had seen Bigfoot in these woods. Heck, I'm sure that they also shared a sandwich a time or two. I've never believed in the paranormal. I think that it can be all explained away by logic and reasoning. You saw a ghost. Yeah, right, that's just your brain imagining it. Did that light turn off on its own? Sure, you might want to call the electrician to fix the crappy job the first electrician did while the house was being built. In saying that, I will admit that I do enjoy a good story, especially creepy ones found across the internet, especially those of the local urban legend across Kentucky of the Goatman or the Bearilla. For those of you who don't know what the Bearilla is, it is a local legend in south central Kentucky about an animal frequently seen at Native American burial grounds and local cemeteries at the edge of small towns. It's described as having short black or gray fur, with a massive waist and even larger arms. It didn't get the name Bearilla for nothing. Its head is being described as that of a larger wolf with long pointy ears, amber eyes, and a short, stubby snout. Some have described it more along the lines of what a stereotypical werewolf would look like. And for the Goatman, well, we have all heard that tale. I don't think it needs any introduction. Anyways, back to the camping trip. I was going alone this time. I thought about bringing my son along as he had just recently turned 13. And I felt more comfortable taking him on longer, harsher trips with minimal gear. He always seemed to enjoy camping, but this one was a little out of his league. It was too cold and the trail was too harsh and unforgiving for anyone without proper experience. The trip itself was over the course of 2 days. The first was hiking up to the site, which was set up on the highest point in the park. And the next was of course a slow hike back, which in all honesty would be even more dangerous due to the rapid drop in elevation, combined with the cold slick mud and clay that would be found on the trail. I always made sure to pack lightly on hiking trips like this, to really push myself when it came to my survival skills. On this trip, I carried with me a small knife, 2 50-foot strands of 550 paracord, my 10 and sleeping bag, and some iodine tablets to purify the water of any harmful bacteria that I found. A small flashlight, really only strong enough to illuminate 10 to 15 feet in front of me. And then of course a fire starter and some duct tape. Overall, I packed more than I normally would for such a trip. However, with the recent birth of my second child a few months ago, I started to take less risks and I packed more each time. For food, I brought with me a pack of beef jerky and some granola bars. That's really all that I needed to feed my slim frame of 150 pounds at 5'11". The time came for me to leave for my trip, Getting in the truck, I felt a cold feeling wash over me. Like a sixth sense telling me not to go on this trip, but of course I ignored it. I'd already taken off work for the 2 days that I would be gone, and I'm not about to waste the few precious vacation days that I got each year. The drive itself should only take 3 hours depending on the ferry still used by the park. The ferry was the quickest and easiest way to get across to the north side of the park, without adding an extra 2 to 3 hours onto the drive. It was a common complaint to those who came on vacation from out of state. However, us locals usually took the chance to catch up on a new book, or to double check our gear in case we had forgotten to pack something, while waiting for the ferry to reach the south side boarding dock. I was currently reading Game of Thrones for the 3rd time. It took the ferry only about 45 minutes to get back on the south side, but when the crew stepped off, they went to each of our vehicles to tell us, due to the increase in wind, and with the currents being strong today, there would be no more rides across the water. Anyone wanting to get across would have to go around and take a bridge to get across, the closest one being an hour-and-a-half drive away from the docks. This at the time it upset me, however. I understood why they couldn't risk the journey across to the other dock, and so I went on my way. It was a fairly long and boring drive. There was no use in bringing my cell phone due to there being no signal anywhere in the park. Even on the tallest peak of the park, you wouldn't get anything. Now I know what people are going to say. You should still bring your cell phone when you go out camping. And to that I agree. But I hated the distraction of it. It always pulled my attention from nature, and I also just didn't want to deal with another piece of equipment that I would need to keep track of. Remember, in my mind, the lighter is the better. Originally, I'd planned to get to the parking lot at the beginning of the trail by 9 a.m. However, it was now noon and I only had about a good 7 hours of daylight left. This meant that I wouldn't be able to make it to the camping grounds at the end of the trail by nightfall. This isn't the first time that this has happened to me, however, but I always hated it when it did. Hiking up the steep incline even in perfect conditions at night was dangerous and heavily advised against by park rangers, so I would have to make do and set up camp at the first area that I could find after sunset, and then start and wake up early tomorrow to catch up on the 3 hours that I had lost due to the ferry. The first 3 hours of the hike went perfect. I saw a timber rattlesnake. If you ever visit the eastern United States, watch out for those. Not only are they big and strong for a snake, but they are also very, and I mean very venomous. Once I had hit the 5-hour mark on my hike, I had run out of water for the second time and needed to refill my bottle since this was the last chance you get until you make your way back down. I was going to go for another 30 minutes or so before I made camp. There's a nice clearing up ahead that, if I can get to, then it'll be in good shape to make up for the lost time tomorrow. While refilling my water, I noticed a paw print in the mud 7 feet off to my left on the bank. It was undoubtedly a canine print, left from what I presumed was a coyote coming to stop for some water sometime in the last 24 hours. That was until I got closer to the print and realized just how massive it was. Now, I'm a smoker and I smoke about a pack a day, and while this print was 2 packs long and slightly bigger than 1 pack wide. Now let me translate that for all the non-smoking readers. Whatever made this print was massive. There's no way a coyote made this print, but there aren't any wolves in Kentucky either. There are also no dog breeds that I know of that have prints that big. Whatever made this was massive, and well, I had no intentions of staying there by the river to wait for its return. I hurried back onto the trail this time with more pep in my step so I could hurry and set up camp to offer some protection if whatever the thing that made that print was still around. I made it to the clearing and set up camp just as the sunset was starting to fade into dusk. First, I quickly set my tent up and threw my sleeping bag inside, followed by starting the fire. There was a predator out there in those woods, The fire would keep them at a distance for a while, at least I thought. I next used my 2 strands of paracord and tied them around the campsite at knee level, to act like as a tripwire for anyone or anything coming onto the campsite, to give myself a few more precious seconds of time to react. I finally sat down and tore into the pack of jerky that I had packed. This gave me some comfort and relaxation, as now I had food in my stomach and a fire to keep me warm. But then I heard a snap. My blood went cold as my mind went a million miles an hour as to what could have made that noise. Was it a person? Could it just be some sort of animal like a deer just passing through? What if it was that creature that made the print back down at the river? Whatever it was large and heavy as I heard twigs snapping louder and louder as it drew closer. "Who's out there? Announce yourself." No answer came. "I'll have a gun and I'll shoot if you don't announce yourself." It was a lie, however. It was a bluff that had gotten a response countless times over the years. However, still no answer came. Whatever was making these noises was heavy. It had to have at least been several hundred pounds for it to make twigs snap that loud, like they were bones being broken with each and every step. That's also when I noticed just how much distance the creature had covered in only a few seconds. Whatever it was, it couldn't be human. Its pace was too slow for the amount of ground covered, and the steps were too loud and powerful for it to be a person. Some time had passed before I heard anything else. The steps had stopped just outside of the light that my fire had produced. Whatever this thing was, it was smart and understood to stay out of the light, where it could see me and I couldn't see it. And there we stayed for what felt like an eternity, unmoving, trying desperately to stretch the little bit of spare wood I gathered, to keep the fire going as long as possible. It was waiting for the fire to die out, but I wouldn't let it. I couldn't let this thing get its chance to attack me in the dark. I knew that if it really wanted me, all it would have to do was come right into the camp and have me for dinner, but it never came. Some time had passed and the fire had come to its small, desperate final breath of life, when I decided to head into my tent, thinking the creature had moved on to choose another target. But that's when I saw it. Those awful amber eyes, cold and without emotion. They struck utter fear into me. This creature was massive. It had to have been at least 8 to 9 feet tall. I couldn't see the body. It was too dark for that, but those eyes, those cold, terrible eyes will haunt me for the rest of my days. I still see them to this day every night, laying awake and in my sleep. I quickly turned my flashlight on and saw the large, lanky frame of this beast. Its dark, black fur covered up what was undoubtedly an impressive and horrifying amount of muscle for its build. That's when I realized the putrid stench that had come with it. In my fear, I had not noticed the foul smell of death and rot that followed this creature. It only took the smallest moment to react and drop down on all fours and let out the lowest, most awful growl that I had ever heard. It could be felt in my soul, and the anger and hatred this thing possessed could only be described as pure evil incarnate. I quickly hurried into my tent and hid for the gruesome end that was about to come my way, praying not to any specific deity but anyone or anything out there who could hear me. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. Please, God, save me. I don't want to die. I heard the creature approach right up on the tent, sniffing and growling at me. I swear I don't think my heart had beat a single time. What felt like hours had passed without a sound, and then it was gone. Its howls could be heard off into the distance, reminded me that I was lucky to not end up as its supper tonight. I didn't sleep for even a second that night. I mean, how could I? I had just experienced the face of pure evil. Malice itself given form into our world, I knew that I shouldn't be alive, and that the only reason I did not die that night was by its choice and that alone. When dawn broke, I exited my tent and found evidence of the creature all over the campsite. Pieces of fur, paw prints, and claw marks on nearby trees, just to name a few. This trend continued on the trail back to the car. I never made it to the end of the trail. As soon as I packed up camp, I hightailed it out of the woods. I knew if I was to encounter that creature again, I wouldn't be so lucky next time. When I got to the car, I threw my backpack into the back seat and hurried into the front seat of the car, not saying a word. I sat there in silence with my face in my palms. But when I looked up, I saw its amber eyes staring at me, looking at me with a pleased expression on its face of the terror and trauma that it had caused me. This thing, it was intelligent. It wasn't after me to kill her for sport. It was after me to make me suffer. Like human suffering was its way of feeding. The look of pleasure on its face, that grin with its long, terrible yellow teeth showing. God, why is such a creature allowed to exist in this world? What grave sin have I committed to be tortured by this thing's existence? I started the car's engine and drove off, driving well over the speed limit. Every now and then, when I would stop at a stop sign, I would swear that I saw those amber eyes, but each time when I looked again, they were gone. When I got to the north side of the park's docks, I waited there patiently as the ferry slowly made its way back. When the crew finally came up to my car, they stopped and remarked how pale I looked, like I had seen a ghost. I knew they wouldn't believe my story, so I brushed it off as the cold weather had taken its toll. I rode home in silence. The radio was turned off and I was left to my own thoughts racing through my mind about the creature. When I arrived home late that night, my wife had already put our daughter to sleep, and my son was off at some friend's house playing Halo 3 and having a good time. I sat there on the couch contemplating what had happened out there on that trip. I decided to head to bed soon after that. When I had opened the door, my wife Sarah had remarked that I stunk, and it was like I had been sprayed by a skunk. My blood ran cold. I smelled it too now, that awful putrid stench. I made sure not to make a face and dismissed her claim, and I went to take a shower. As I got done, I looked out the window and there it was, illuminated by the streetlight with that insidious grin on its face. It had followed me home, and saw the fear on my face. Oh, the joy that must have given it. It's been 2 months since that camping trip, and every night it returns. Sometimes brushing up against the side of the house, other times staring through the window, and others howling in the distance. It made sure that I understood that it wasn't going anywhere. I had done some digging online and found out the creature was the Barilla. It had other names as well, like Dogman and the Beast of Bray Road. It's been 3 months since I found out what this creature was. I've been in contact with God knows how many experts to try and rid this thing from my existence. Each attempt became more and more desperate, and with each attempt, the Dogman's pleasure grew. It knew that I was desperate to rid myself of it. I cannot keep living my life this way. When you find that I'll be gone by the time you find this, just know that I love you and that I'm sorry. I will not give the creature the pleasure it seeks so adamantly. I'm sorry. I love you all, and when you read this, please sell the house and move as far away from Mammoth Cave as you can. When it learns that I have ended myself, it will come for one of you next.